They say betrayal feels like a knife, but to me, it felt quieter, like a door closing in the middle of the night. No sound, no warning, just the faint click that tells you something's over, even if you don't know what yet. My name is Grace Turner. I'm 38, and I used to believe I had the perfect life. A husband who was gentle and patient, a sister who was my best friend, and a home that looked like stability carved in brick and light. I used to believe in things like loyalty, effort, and second chances. Now I believe in evidence, in silence, and in how quickly the people you die for can decide you're the one they want gone. It started with a smell. Not metaphorically, an actual smell. A faint sweetness. Something chemical that didn't belong in my kitchen. It would come and go. Usually in the mornings after I left my coffee cup in the sink, I remember joking to my husband, Daniel, that maybe I'd left milk out too long. He smiled, kissed my forehead, told me I was working too hard again. His lips were warm, reassuring, but behind his words, something felt delayed, rehearsed. Daniel and I had been married for 12 years. He was the calm to my chaos. At least that's how we liked to describe ourselves at dinner parties. I was a hospital administrator, constantly on my phone, juggling deadlines and people's emergencies. He was an architect, quiet, thoughtful, always sketching something on the back of napkins. We'd met in college. My sister, Lily, introduced us. Lily was 3 years younger than me. Where I was practical, she was effortless. The kind of woman who could wear thrifted clothes and look like she stepped out of a magazine. She'd been through heartbreaks, failed startups, sudden moves across states, and somehow, everyone still adored her. She used to say I was her anchor. She said Daniel was lucky to have someone who never gave up on people. Now I wish I had. The first crack appeared a few weeks after my mother died. Her passing was quiet. Heart failure in her sleep. The kind that leaves a hole you don't know how to fill. I was drowning in logistics and grief. And Daniel was distant. Not cruel, just elsewhere. When I'd try to talk about funeral details, he'd change the subject. When I'd cry, he'd say he needed air. It was Lily who came over every day. She cooked, cleaned, held me when I broke down. She reminded me of things I'd forgotten how to eat, how to sleep, how to breathe. Sometimes, I'd catch Daniel watching her with that look, the kind of look that used to belong to me, but I told myself I was imagining it. People see ghosts in grief. I told myself that. I wanted to believe it. After the funeral, Lily kept coming. At first, it made sense. The house was large, and her apartment lease had ended. I told her she could stay in the guest room for a few weeks. She smiled, hugged me, said I'd saved her life. The first few weeks were fine. Then the tension began to curl through the walls. It started small, Lily using my perfume, borrowing my clothes without asking, laughing a little too easily at Daniel's dry jokes. I'd walk into the kitchen and find them mid-conversation, pausing like they'd been caught doing something private. But every time I confronted it, they'd deflect. "You're being paranoid," Daniel would say gently. "You've been through so much lately." I started doubting myself. Grief can make you see patterns that don't exist, or maybe that's what people tell you to keep you quiet. Then came the email. It arrived one Tuesday morning at work. No subject line. No signature. Just one sentence. Check the folder under blueprints. May 2018. He left it there. I almost deleted it. But something in my gut said, look. When I got home, Daniel was out on a client dinner. Lily was watching TV. Legs curled up on the couch. One of my sweaters draped over her shoulders. I went into Daniel's office. His laptop was locked. But the shared family computer wasn't. The folder was easy to find blueprints. May 2018. Inside were scanned contracts, bank transfers, property records, but not for the firm. For me, My name was on multiple documents transferring partial ownership of my mother's house to Daniel, and another name I didn't recognize. Lily Turner. The dates were recent. After the funeral, my blood went cold. There were also emails between Daniel and someone labeled L. The language was intimate. Too familiar. We'll make it look natural. She'll never see it coming. Once it's done, we can start over. I don't remember sitting down. I remember staring at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. My own reflection faint in the glass. For the first time, I didn't feel grief. I felt clarity. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning something. That night, I didn't confront them. I smiled, cooked dinner, pretended everything was fine. I watched them exchange glances across the table like two teenagers too clever for the world. I poured wine. I asked Lily about her job hunt. She said Daniel was helping her design a small business office. I nodded. I smiled again, but my hands shook so hard I had to set the glass down before it shattered. After they went to bed, I stayed up until dawn. I didn't cry. I went through every drawer, every folder, every hidden pocket in Daniel's desk. By sunrise, I knew everything. The offshore account, the forged documents, the loan taken out against my mother's estate, my sister's digital signature next to his, and I knew something else: they were going to sell the house. My house, the one place left that still smelled like my mother's lavender candles. That morning, I made them breakfast. Eggs, toast, orange juice. I smiled as I watched them eat. They thought they were playing chess. But they'd forgotten that I was raised by a woman who taught me to play quietly and win quietly. Over the next week, I made copies of every document, backed up the emails, and sent them to my private account. I met with a lawyer, someone discreet, someone my mother had trusted before she died. We drafted papers. I pretended to be oblivious while I prepared to burn everything they'd built behind my back. But I also wanted them to feel it. The confusion, the unraveling, the fear that something had shifted and they couldn't name it yet. So I gave them small doses of doubt, little cracks in their perfect illusion. I stopped reacting to their small manipulations. I locked my phone. I took days off work and told them nothing. I looked at Daniel the way he looked at me, with gentle calculation. One night, I heard them arguing in the living room. Lily's voice, sharp and scared. She's acting weird. Maybe she knows. Daniel hissed something back, but I couldn't make it out. I smiled in the dark. For the first time, I wasn't the one losing sleep. But revenge, real revenge, isn't about speed. It's about precision and patience. I didn't know it yet, but the moment that would change everything was already set in motion. A dinner invitation, a toast, and one single glass of wine that none of us would ever forget. The dinner was my idea. I told them it was to celebrate new beginnings. I said I wanted to put the past behind us, the grief, the tension, the misunderstandings that had been floating between us like invisible smoke. Daniel's eyes softened with relief. Lily hugged me so tightly, it almost felt sincere. Almost. I chose a Friday night. That gave me 3 days to prepare. On the surface, I planned everything like a hostess, desperate to reclaim her family's harmony candles. Soft jazz. White lilies in a vase by the window. But underneath that, I planned something else entirely. I had already spoken to my lawyer and signed what needed to be signed. The property transfers were frozen. The accounts flagged. Quietly. The walls around their little conspiracy had begun to close in. They just didn't know it yet. The house smelled of garlic and rosemary that night. I remember it vividly because it reminded me of my mother. She used to cook that way whenever she wanted to disguise the scent of something burning. It seemed fitting. When Daniel came home, he kissed my cheek like nothing had ever happened. His hand lingered at my waist. Familiar and foreign all at once. Lily was already there. Barefoot. Wine glass in hand. Humming to the music as she arranged napkins. Watching her in my kitchen felt like a stranger walking through my memories. Every drawer she opened used to belong to my life. Now it was hers. You've outdone yourself, Daniel said. Looking around, I smiled. You deserve it. He raised an eyebrow. We all do. I laughed, not bitterly, not mockingly, just enough to sound believable. As we sat down, I poured the wine. My mother's old crystal glasses caught the light, refracting it into small red stars on the tablecloth. The sound of liquid filling the glass was almost soothing. I handed one to Daniel, one to Lily, one to myself, to family. I said. They echoed it, unaware that the word was disintegrating as it left their lips. Dinner passed like a scene rehearsed too many times. Daniel told a story about a client who'd mistaken blueprints for floor plans. Lily laughed too loudly. I nodded, smiled, played my part. Beneath the table, my hands were steady for the first time in weeks. Halfway through dessert, I excused myself to the kitchen. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from my lawyer. They attempted another withdrawal. Blocked. Documents secured. I stared at the screen for a moment, then looked up at the reflection of the dining room in the glass door. They were still talking. Oblivious. I could have ended it there, told them everything, thrown the truth like a grenade, and watched them scramble. But I wanted something more precise. When I returned, I brought a new bottle of wine, a better vintage, one Daniel had been saving for years. I poured 3 glasses again, this time making sure his and Lily's were generous. He lifted his, smiling. What's this for? For closure, I said softly. He clinked his glass against mine. To closure. The sound echoed. The clock ticked. I watched them drink. Nothing happened. Of course, there was no poison. No, kinematic collapse. That wasn't my revenge. My revenge was slower, quieter. It was in the way Daniel's phone started buzzing 5 minutes later. The way his face drained of color when he saw the notifications. The way he excused himself, went into his office, and didn't return for 10 minutes. When he came back, his composure had cracked. What did you do? He asked. Voice low, strained. He tilted my head. What do you mean? He threw his phone onto the table. The screen glowed with messages from his lawyer, his bank, his partner at the firm. Words like frozen, investigation, breach of fiduciary trust. Lily frowned. What's going on? He looked at her like she was suddenly part of the problem instead of the plan. She knows, he said through clenched teeth. I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands, and smiled. Of course I know. The silence that followed was exquisite. You could hear the storm forming behind their eyes. Lily was the first to break. Grace, it's not what you think. Stop. I interrupted. My voice was calm. Steady. Don't insult me with that. Her lips trembled. I didn't mean to. You did. I said. You both did. And you thought I'd never find out. But you made one mistake. Daniel's yaff clenched. What mistake? You assumed I was naive. I said. You thought grief made me blind. It made me watch. I stood, walked around the table slowly, and stopped behind him. Every document you forged, every transfer you signed, every late-night email you thought was deleted, I saw them all. He turned, eyes wide with something between fury and disbelief. You're ruining us. No, I said softly. You ruined us years ago. I'm just returning the favor. Lily pushed back her chair, tears streaking down her face. Grace, please. I love you. You're my sister. Were, I said. You were my sister. Now you're just someone who taught me what loyalty really costs. The room felt smaller. I could see the realization settling into Daniel's features, the dawning horror of a man realizing the woman he underestimated had built the perfect trap. He tried one last time. We can fix this. We can talk to the bank. Sort things out. I laughed. The sound sharp and final. You think this is about money? I stepped closer until I could see my reflection in his eyes. This was about dignity. About walking into my mother's house and realizing you planned to erase her name from every deed. Every memory. You turned my grief into strategy. Sonu. Daniel. We can't fix this. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. Lily stood frozen, her mascara bleeding into dark rivers. You'll destroy both of us. I looked at her, my voice almost tender. That's what betrayal does. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then Daniel whispered, almost to himself, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least my regrets will be honest." I picked up my glass, took one small sip, and set it down again. Dinner's over. I left them there, surrounded by candlelight and everything they'd thought they controlled. By the time I reached my bedroom, the first sounds of their argument echoed through the hallway, low at first, then rising, splintering, breaking. I closed the door and let it happen. The next morning, Lily was gone. Her closet empty, her toothbrush missing. Daniel's side of the bed was untouched. He came downstairs just as I was finishing my coffee. His eyes bloodshot, his voice hoarse. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. I met his gaze and smiled faintly. "I already did." He didn't answer, just walked out the door, leaving it slightly ajar behind him. I didn't follow, because real revenge doesn't need witnesses. It just needs silence and time to echo. And mine was only just beginning. 3 days passed before the storm really broke. At first, the house was still. Too quiet, the kind of silence that feels staged. Like the air itself is waiting for an audience. I moved through the rooms as if in someone else's life. Every object felt unfamiliar, stripped of its former meaning. Daniel's sketches still lay scattered on the dining table. Pencil lines, unfinished. Edges smudged where his hand used to rest. Lily's mug, my favorite mug. The one she'd quietly claimed as hers still sat by the sink. The faint stain of her lipstick ring had dried into the porcelain. Grief and fury live close together. I learned some mornings they swapped places. By the 4th day, Daniel's car was gone. But his shadow lingered in everything in the rumpled sheets. In the smell of his cologne on my coat. In the way the floor creaked in the hallway as if remembering his steps. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt something colder. Sharper. Revenge was satisfying in theory. But in practice, it was lonely. Then the call came. It was from Detective Morales, the officer assigned to my mother's estate. He sounded polite but clipped. The way people do when they're holding information you don't want to hear. "Mrs. Turner," he began. "I thought you should know there's been a report filed involving your husband." I held my breath. "What kind of report?" He hesitated. "A missing person." He sank into a chair. "Who filed it?" "His business partner," Morales said. "Apparently, Daniel hasn't been to work in several days. His car was found near the cliffs by Lake Everton." The cliffs? That's where he used to take Lily. I remembered the photos, the two of them laughing by the water. My husband's arm around my sister's shoulder, like it belonged there. "Do you think he's alive?" I asked quietly. "We don't know yet," he replied. "But if you hear from him, please let us know immediately." After the call, I sat staring at the phone for a long time. I wasn't sure what I felt: shock, fear, guilt, or something darker. A part of me whispered that maybe this was the universe's way of closing the circle. Maybe some stories don't need courts or lawyers. Maybe karma just takes her time. That night, rain began to fall. Soft but relentless. I lit one of my mother's old lavender candles and sat by the window, watching droplets trace the glass. Each streak caught the reflection of the house, a house that felt emptier by the hour. I thought about what I'd done, what I'd uncovered, and the life that had unraveled because of it. I had imagined victory would feel powerful, cinematic, but what I felt was something closer to exhaustion, a quiet ache that whispered, "You won." But at what cost? 2 days later, a knock came at the door. When I opened it, Lily stood there. She looked nothing like herself. Her hair was disheveled, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held a folded newspaper. She didn't ask to come in, she just stepped forward, her eyes red and swollen. "You've seen this," she whispered, thrusting the paper toward me. The headline read, "Architect Daniel Turner, presumed dead after car found abandoned." My stomach dropped. The photo below it, him smiling, confident, looked like a stranger now. "They think he jumped," she said. Her voice cracked. "They think because of what happened with the firm, the investigation, the money." I took a slow breath. "You should come inside." She followed me into the living room, her movements frantic, as if she couldn't bear to be still. "You did this," she said suddenly. "You pushed him too far. I exposed what both of you did. He loved you." "Grace," she shouted. "You destroyed him." The words cut deeper than I expected. I turned to her. "You helped him destroy me. Don't pretend you didn't know what you were doing." Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't think it would go this far. I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. That's the thing about betrayal, Lily. It always goes further than you think. It spreads. She shook her head, backing away as if my calm frightened her. "I just wanted him to see me," she said. "You always had everything. The house, the job, the love. I was tired of being the one people pitied. And now," I asked softly, "do you feel seen?" She didn't answer. She just sank onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. The storm outside roared louder, shaking the windows. "I didn't know that he'd do something like this," she whispered. "He said he just needed time. He said he'd fix it." I stared at the rain. Some things can't be fixed. We sat in silence for a long time. Then she looked up, her eyes hollow. "If he's really gone, I don't know who I am without him." I wanted to feel pity, but I couldn't. "You'll find out," I said, the way I did. "Alone." She flinched like the word was a slap. Before she left, she turned to me at the door. "You think you won, Grace," she said, "but trust me, the guilt will eat you alive." When she was gone, I stood there, listening to the echo of her footsteps fading into the storm. The house felt heavier than before. That night, I dreamed of the cliffs, of Daniel standing by the edge, looking out over the water, turning toward me with that same expression he used to wear when he thought I wasn't watching, half guilt, half calculation. Only this time, his face softened. He said something I couldn't hear. Then he stepped forward and vanished into the dark. I woke with tears on my face. The next morning, the police called. They had found a body, male, mid-40s, clothes matching Daniel's description. They needed me to come in for identification. The drive to the morgue was a blur. I remember the smell of rain on asphalt, the dull hum of the wipers, the ache in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe. When they pulled back the sheet, I saw his face pale, waterlogged, strangely peaceful. It was him, but the peace didn't belong to me. As I walked out, Detective Morales stopped me. "For what it's worth," he said. There was no note, no sign of struggle. Could have been an accident. I nodded numbly. Could have been. But deep down, I knew Daniel never did anything without intention. He'd rather vanish on his own terms than face the world stripped of control. Even in death, he got the last move. That night, I returned home, sat at the same dining table where everything had ended. The candles were gone, the wine glasses put away. But the ghost of that dinner still lingered in the air. I picked up my pen and began to write, not to Daniel, not to Lily, but to myself. Forgiveness isn't peace. I wrote, it's survival. And sometimes survival looks like learning to live with the wreckage you didn't cause but still have to clean up. Outside, the rain slowed, the house exhaled, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to quiet. The quiet didn't last. It never does after death, not when there are unanswered questions, unpaid debts, and people who can't stop replaying the last thing they said. The town treated Daniel's death like a headline rather than a tragedy. The newspaper called it an unthinkable fall from grace. The irony made me laugh bitterly when I first saw it. They didn't mean me. But it still felt personal. I avoided the grocery store, the cafe, the church, every place I went. I felt eyes lingering too long, whispers blooming in corners. That's the thing about small towns. Forgiveness doesn't exist here. Only curiosity and slow poison disguised as sympathy. Lily disappeared for a while. I didn't ask where she went. Maybe she thought I wouldn't care, and maybe I didn't. But then one afternoon, I received a letter. No return address. Just my name written in her looping handwriting. The same way she used to sign birthday cards when we were children. I stared at it for hours before opening it. Inside was a single page, slightly crumpled, written in haste. You were right. About everything. I didn't just betray you. I betrayed myself. I thought I could handle the guilt. But it's eating me alive. He wasn't supposed to die. I wanted to hurt you. Not lose him. I'm leaving town. Don't look for me. Maybe one day, when I'm brave enough, I'll tell you the whole truth about that night at the cliffs. That night, I read that sentence again and again until the words blurred. The whole truth about that night at the cliffs. The police had ruled it an accident. But what if it wasn't? What if Daniel hadn't jumped? What if he'd been pushed by the only other person who could have been there? The thought crept into my mind like water through a crack. Slow, but unstoppable. I tried to dismiss it. But once suspicion is born, it doesn't die easily. I drove to the cliffs 2 days later. The air there always felt heavier. The sky lower. The wind howled off the lake, carrying that cold, metallic smell of wet stone. I parked by the guardrail and walked to the edge. The spot was still marked with wilted flowers and a cross someone had nailed into the ground. I crouched there, tracing the initials carved into the wood D. T. The letters looked freshly cut, too neat for something made in grief. I closed my eyes and pictured that night Daniel pacing, maybe drinking, waiting. Maybe Lily met him there. Desperate. Frightened, cornered by the consequences of what we'd uncovered. Maybe he told her he was going to confess everything. Maybe she panicked, and maybe she pushed. It was just a thought, but once it arrived, it refused to leave. I went home that night and poured myself a glass of wine, staring at the dark reflection of the house in the window. I should have felt vindicated, the universe handing me a twisted form of justice. But all I felt was fatigue. Revenge is a circle. Walk far enough around it, and you end up where you began. Just lonelier. The days blurred after that. Lawyers called about closing the investigation. The firm collapsed. My mother's estate finally transferred back into my name. I signed the papers without emotion. On the outside, everything was resolved. But inside, I was a house half-burned standing, but hollow. Then, one evening, a knock came at the door. It was Detective Morales again. He stood there with that same calm authority, hat in hand, eyes shadowed with the kind of weariness that comes from dealing with people's darkest moments. "Mrs. Turner," he said, "I wanted to inform you personally that the case is officially closed. Cause of death, accidental fall." I nodded. "Thank you." He hesitated. There was something else. "We found something when they drained part of the lake last week. A phone. Waterlogged but intact. It was Daniel's. We recovered a few fragments of messages. Some were to your sister. My throat tightened. What did they say? He pulled out a small notebook. Flipping through pages. The last one was time-stamped at 1043 p.m., the night he died. It read, "Meet me at the cliffs. We need to end this before she finds out what we did. End for me." I felt my pulse in my ears. "Before I find out what you did?" Morales nodded slowly. "Do you know what that means?" "No," I said truthfully, "but I'm guessing I'm not supposed to." He gave me a long, searching look. "If your sister contacts you again, let us know." "I will." When he left, I stood by the door for a long time, the wind sneaking through the cracks, carrying the faint scent of rain. I thought about Daniel's last message. Before she finds out what we did, what had they done that I still didn't know? Maybe it was about the forged documents. Maybe it was about money. Or maybe a darker thought my mother's death hadn't been as peaceful as we all believed. The idea lodged deep in me, too sharp to ignore. That night, I went to the attic to look through my mother's old things. Boxes upon boxes, photographs, letters, legal papers. She had always been meticulous. As I sifted through them, one envelope caught my attention. It was addressed to me, sealed, but never sent. The handwriting was shaky. The ink faded. I opened it. "My darling Grace, if you ever find this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you in person. Be careful who you trust, especially the ones who share your blood. I've made mistakes trying to protect you and your sister. Some things I can't undo. But I hope you'll understand one day. If you ever question what happened, look in the cedar box under my bed. Mom." My hands shook as I pulled out the cedar box. Inside were old medical reports, not hers, but Lily's. A history of substance use, psychological evaluations, a court document about a restraining order filed years ago by a former employer, one I'd never known about, and tucked between them, a smaller note written in my mother's hand. "I've told Daniel. He promised to keep her secret. For your sake." I sank to the floor. So Daniel had known. He'd been protecting Lily all along, not from me, but from herself. And maybe that protection had come with strings, with manipulation, with guilt. Maybe their alliance hadn't been built purely on betrayal, but on fear. I realized then that the story I'd told myself, the clean lines of villain and victim, was messier than I could bear. There were no heroes here, just people doing what they thought they had to do. And me, standing in the wreckage, mistaking vengeance for healing. I stayed in the attic until morning, the sun creeping through the dusty window. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt old. Sometimes truth isn't a revelation. Sometimes it's a slow unspooling the moment you realize every person in your life had their own version of the same tragedy. I went downstairs, made coffee, and stood in the doorway watching the light spill over the kitchen floor. The house no longer felt haunted, just empty. Maybe that was its own kind of peace. But as I sipped my coffee, one last thought flickered through me, quiet, dangerous, and unsolved. If Lily had truly loved him, why had she survived that night? And he hadn't. And why? Deep down, did I already know the answer? The morning after I read my mother's letter, I woke to a sound I hadn't heard in months. Birds. Their soft calls slipped through the cracked window like a language I'd forgotten. The world, it seemed, was moving on. But inside me, something still burned, not anger anymore, but the ghost of it, the ache that comes when the storm has passed, and you're left to count what it took. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where everything had started, where the laughter, the lies, and the final unraveling had all played out. The sunlight hit the wood in the same way it always did. But the house felt different now. Quieter, lighter, honest, in its own wounded way. I made a decision then, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't live in half-truths anymore. I needed to see Lily. It took me 3 days to find her. The return address on her letter had been fake, but I had her bank records from the lawyer's files. And one recent transaction caught my eye, a small inn, 3 towns over, near the old highway. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be found. When I arrived, the woman at the front desk gave me a long, suspicious look before nodding toward room 6. "She doesn't take visitors," she said. "She'll take this one," I replied. I stood outside the door for a long time before knocking. When it opened, Lily looked smaller, somehow thinner, her skin pale and raw, like the guilt had eaten through her from the inside. She froze when she saw me. "Grace." Her voice cracked on my name. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then stepped aside. The room was a wreck clothes on the chair, half-eaten food containers, an open suitcase spilling its contents onto the carpet. The curtains were drawn, and the air smelled faintly of cheap wine and regret. I sat on the edge of the bed. She stayed by the window, arms crossed as if bracing for a storm that had already come. "You got my letter," she said quietly. "I did." We stood in silence for a while. Then I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the moment I'd read her note. "That night at the cliffs, were you there?" She turned away, pressing a trembling hand to her forehead. "Don't ask me that." "I have to." Her shoulders began to shake. "He called me," she said finally. "He said he wanted to talk to make things right. To tell you everything. He said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore." "And you went?" She nodded. "I didn't want him to. I told him confessing would ruin both of us. But he wouldn't listen. He said what we did to you wasn't love, it was punishment." Her voice broke. "He said he was going to tell you everything, and that you'd forgive him someday." I felt my heart pounding, and then her eyes met mine wide, hollow, shimmering with something between fear and confession. "He said he was going to the police after he called you." I panicked. I grabbed his arm. I just wanted him to stop talking. He pulled away, slipped on the rocks. Her breath hitched. And then he was gone. The words hung there, fragile and irreversible. "So it wasn't an accident," I said softly. Tears spilled down her face. "I didn't mean to. I swear. Grace. I didn't mean to." He was screaming. And then there was silence. And she broke down completely, sinking to her knees. I tried to climb down, but it was too dark. I just left him there. I left him. I watched her, the woman who'd once shared my childhood bed during thunderstorms, who'd stolen my husband, my trust, and now this final truth. I waited for the rage to come, but it didn't. Instead, I felt something far heavier. Pity. "You've been running ever since," I said quietly. She nodded, shaking. "Every night. I see him. I see the look on his face before he fell. I hear the water." I exhaled slowly. "You should tell the police." "I can't." Her voice was small. "Desperate. I'll go to prison. Please. Grace. You've taken everything else, don't take my life too." I looked at her, my sister, broken in ways I couldn't fix. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I walked to the window and opened the curtains. Light flooded the room, harsh and pure. "You're already in prison." "Lily," I said, "you just built yours out of secrets." She covered her face with her hands and sobbed. I didn't touch her. I didn't forgive her. But I didn't hate her either. Maybe that was my punishment to understand her. When I left, she was still crying on the floor. I didn't look back. Some things don't deserve a second glance. It's been 6 months since then. The investigation into Daniel's death is closed. Officially an accident. I never told the police what Lily confessed. Some part of me believes that truth isn't always justice, that sometimes the weight of living with it is sentence enough. I sold the house 2 months ago. It had become a museum of ghosts, my mother. Daniel, the woman I used to be. I kept only one thing, the cedar box. It sits in my new apartment by the window, where the sunlight hits it every morning. A reminder of what happens when love turns to silence and trust turns to strategy. People sometimes ask how I've recovered. I smile. Tell them healing takes time. What I don't say is that healing is not a return to who you were. It's becoming someone new because the old you didn't survive. There are nights when I still dream of the cliffs. But now, Daniel's face isn't full of anger or blame. It's peaceful. As if he finally understands that I'm done carrying his guilt. I visit Lily sometimes not out of love, but out of duty. She's living in a small coastal town now, volunteering at a shelter. She doesn't speak much. When she does, it's about small things, the weather, the garden, the sea. We don't talk about that night. We don't need to. Every silence between us says enough. Last week, she gave me something, a photo of us as children. Arms wrapped around each other, grinning through missing teeth. On the back, she'd written in shaky handwriting, "We were better before we learned how to lie." I keep it on my nightstand, because maybe that's the real lesson in all of this, that betrayal doesn't end when the truth comes out. It ends when you finally stop letting the people who hurt you define what comes next. I'm not the same woman who started this story. I'm not the victim. I'm not the avenger. I'm just someone who survived both. And sometimes, that's enough.